Bryan Mark Taylor, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Great to be here. I love talking to you, Jeff.
So we go back a little ways and have done some work together, which is fun. But it's good to have you here because I want to talk to you a little bit about your life and where you've come from and where you're going and everything you're working on right now. So let's start with your background. Tell me a little bit about where you came from and how you ended up getting into this art field.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I think it's gonna be fun to talk to you because I think we do have some similarities in that we have a broad passion of what it means to have a creative life, and maybe some of the things I'll talk about that I haven't talked a lot in other podcasts because we mostly focus just on painting. But I think, especially with things that you enjoy doing, and maybe I'll talk a little bit a broader range of some things.
Oh, I want to. That's definitely what I want my focus to be.
Yeah. So, I think we both have a mutual admiration in Da Vinci, and I consider, a god, right? In terms of just the person, the patron saint, maybe of what I would like to get out of life, and that is kind of a total immersion in what life has to offer. And so, as a kid, we kind of lived on the edge of town in Bountiful, Utah. We were the highest house on the edge of town, and I kind of grew up in the back hills, wandering around, kind of getting in trouble. It's kind of a Huck Finn lifestyle. Starting fires when I shouldn't have started fires, finding buried treasure, catching lizards, catching snakes, backpacking, hiking, fishing, all kinds of stuff. It was a very kind of open-ended, I was kind of a turnkey kid where my parents didn't see me. I left in the morning, was wandering and doing, stuff with my friends, playing in the dirt, and then would come back kind of at dinner time. And I think that at least for me and the kind of creative or the life I wanted to live it was really beneficial for me because, I do have to admit, I do have some, and people would probably be surprised to hear this. And I actually haven't talked much about it, but I think I need to talk about it a little bit because I've noticed it's been a benefit to people. Is I'm kind of an anxious soul, and I have a certain amount of social anxiety, and just being around people is both a great thing and something that I enjoy, but it's also extremely draining. And so I need to kind of go into those kinds of places, the outdoors, or I need to be away from people. And I think that's in part a big part of my desire to go into landscape painting is definitely goes with my lifestyle. And even going through school at the Academy of Art University, both undergrad at BYU and then grad work at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, I did enjoy that, but at the same time, being with the model, being with all of the students in a room was a little bit hard on my psyche. So I am kind of a little bit of a wanderer and to some degree a lone wolf, but I really enjoy, being outdoors, connecting with nature, and kind of being away from the social aspects of human life that have been, that cause stress, I guess, to some degray.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Ironically,
go ahead.
The interesting thing is I married somebody that's extremely social.
Mm-hmm.
And like if I had my way, I'd probably live out in the middle of nowhere and then engage with people on occasion. But my wife, definitely doesn't like that. So we're more in this kind of a suburban lifestyle with a big backyard, at least to have kind of a little bit of a farm and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's the best of both worlds. But anyway, that's just a little bit about my personality, why I kind of gravitated towards the landscape painting and environment type things is because of when my happiest moments were when I was just out in nature, kind of connecting directly with things that don't necessarily talk back.
Hmm.
You know, you could just engage with them on that kind of abstract level.
Yeah, that's interesting because for I've been teaching for 20 years and I've always told my students to not stress about finding your voice, but to just let your temperament sort of dictate who you become as an artist. But this is an extreme version of that, where you're an introvert, so get as far away from people as you can and go out into the wilderness by yourself and become a landscape painter, which I think is it's great, you know? Do what makes you happy. But I mean that's a
Yeah,
testament to that idea of just choose the art that is natural to you and not to force it. Just do what feels right.
yeah, you know, and I think there's a lot to that. And I've had this conversation also with artists that are maybe deciding, you know, if I started painting teepees and cowboys and Indians and things like that, I could make a lot more money. You know, the market's really strong for Western, that type of Western art. But, you know, at the end of the day, I get back into this idea of, you know, the people and and I just want a little bit more of the purity. Even when I paint, you know, cityscapes that are really bustling, I don't focus as much on the human element, but more kind of what humans have created and just on a kind of visual abstract level.
Mm.
I think I connect with artists like Richard Diebenkorn quite a bit because of that reason. Um, some of the Bay Area artists, of course, also Wayne Thiebaud and others, you know, there's just kind of an abstraction to what they're interested in, and I think that's a part of what I'm gravitating towards. Less of the figurative element, even though I guess my work would be considered in the figurative tradition because it deals to some degree with realism or elements of it. But it's really not the realism that is attracting me, but it's the shapes and the colors, textures, all of the abstract elements. Those are the things that are really kind of gravitating that I'm gravitating towards.
Mm.
Um, and so it's kind of the patterns of light and shadow, the patterns of nature, the rhythms of, um, you know, even the movement of animals and things like that. All that kind of stuff is really interesting. And that's not to say that I don't like. Again, I don't like that. I'm one of those people that hate humans or things like that. I'm not like that. But I just get tired. I get exhausted by it. And so I need to kind of have a little bit of a barrier visually or personally or
Yeah.
psychologically inside in order to do that. And I think that is also reflected in my work as well.
Yeah. And I can vouch for that for those listening that Brian's a nice guy. He doesn't appear to hate humans. So you also do abstract and still life, though, which I guess also keeps you away from humans, as you put it. So what is your favorite of
Yeah.
the three?
Well, I think I definitely my first love is often like cityscape. So let me go back. You kind of asked at the beginning, you know, what were my initial interests in being an artist?
Oh, okay.
So when I was 8, I took a huge, I had a huge connection to origami. Actually, I loved just the folded paper, the
Mm-hmm.
lines it would create, the division of space, and there was something about it that is like when you're folding the paper, you're centering your soul or something. There's a little bit of a Zen element, and I've kind of sought that. You know, being a little bit more of an anxious personality, is as I've tried to find those things those that I can do to have that kind of Zen feeling. And origami, the practice of it was quite. Um, and this is before the days where like you go on YouTube and find stuff. So I had to
Yeah.
really kind of search out things. You know, I would make my own models and stuff like that. And so my room was just covered in all of these models that I made. So
Origami
that's kind of one
models?
thread that has, yeah, that I created, like,
Yeah.
you know, animals and things
Hmm.
I create. So, you know, I'm 8 years old and already making my own stuff and own models and things like that.
Wow.
So there's a little bit, uh, you know, the mechanical side or the geometry, and you know that later on, you know, when I developed Strata easel, you know, all of that is folded metal. It's basically origami in metal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of a view that, so I can rotate models and things in my head of how things are going to work, how the metal will fold, and stuff like that. But so anyway, the little threads like that through your childhood, I think, really kind of come, on down the road, and kind of pop up in other places.
Yeah.
And I find that really fascinating. I think another thread is water has always been interesting to me. I loved fishing as a kid, and that's part of the outdoor life. And fishing, a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's so boring," and I'll say, "The most exciting thing about fishing is it's running out of gas out in the middle of nowhere."
Really?
But
Why?
I'm just joking
Oh.
because no, it's just not. Instead of defending fishing as being interest or fun or interesting, and I'll just say, you can have some fun moments. You can have life-threatening moments, which we did have, forgetting water and getting stuck places out in canyons and things like that. But anyway, I this love of water too is a theme in my work, and I've treated it on and off. And I just went to Sicily for 3.5 weeks, and toured the entire island, all these beach towns. We saw about 45 different towns, and really it was an amazing experience. A lot of it had to do with the interaction of the buildings and water, and the clarity of the water. I love fish. I love I scuba dive. And some of those themes have entered into my work, both my imaginative realism work as well as traditional work, painting boats, and painting. Uh, the abstraction of water is just a fascinating thing. That's something I'll be talking about at VisionX Live as well. It's a theme again that started in my childhood, and is part of my temperament
Yeah.
to kind of interact with something. So when you have a sketch of Da Vinci where he actually studied how water swirled around after it came out of a pipe, as he noticed that, I really resonated with his desire to kind of understand this abstract motion that was going on.
Hmm.
And other things, when you're out in nature, you're paying attention to the animals, you're paying attention to, the way um, animals move through the landscape, as well as clouds and rivers, and you're kind of paying attention to all those things. So there's something to all that. I think that really psychologically we need, and maybe need it more than ever, because everybody's so stressed out and
Mm-hmm.
outraged by what's going on in the world today. I do think we need to get out into nature a little bit more and try and calm down, find a little bit of peace there. And I guess that's something I've always tried to do as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I noticed you were in Italy. When you were in Italy, you posted a lot of you painting on location, which is always fun to see. And so, is that therapeutic for you when you're on trips like that to just get away from everything for a few minutes, or I guess it'll be a few hours, and just be alone and paint a new place like that?
Yeah, yeah. I think plein air is, I consider it an act of meditation,
Really?
much like a yoga practice. For me, that's what it's become, as much as anything, is to it forces you, maybe force is the wrong word, because I think it allows you, especially me as somebody that has an extremely busy life, where every single moment I'm taking action towards something,
Yeah.
and maybe having a hard time. Again, my mind's working really fast, and what I'm trying to do is get it less anxious and to slow it down a little bit. And I think that's what plein air painting does for me, because ideas keep flooding in, and thoughts of things that I could do. And my wife gets mad at me about, hey, we should do this business, or or this idea, or let's, even while I was in Sicily, I was like, we should we should buy a house down here, and fix it all up, and we could
Oh
do an
man.
Airbnb and then come.
Yeah, we do have a lot in common. I torture my wife
you
with that
know
kind of stuff all the time.
totally. So part of it is being engaged like that, and like Da Vinci in his notebook, he says, remember to study the beak of a woodpecker, right? And that's the kind of stuff, like, I look at that, totally, why wouldn't you do that?
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things I'm interested in. So, like, say I travel to Sicily. Obviously, I want to know about the history. I want to know about the culinary food, how it developed. I want to know how people are feeling today about things. I want to know why towns in Sicily are crumbling, why people don't want to live in these historic centers anymore, why they're giving away houses for €1, and what does that mean? How our house is changing, or the landscape and the people that are living there. And so um, there's all these layers of things that I'm interested in,
Yeah.
and so it's an extremely active, and part of that is that kind of anxious soul wanting to know everything and I wish I had more lives that I could live.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many to explore and understand. So with all of that, I think, plein air painting, fortunately, I'm able to do that as a way to also record this, make a living by selling my work. But I'm really interested, like, if I'm kind of a Darwin type character too. Like, I'm a naturalist in a way. I have a bunch of seashells, I have butterflies, I have, collections of old mechanical objects and things like that. I'm just interested in a lot of different things. And so
Mm-hmm.
that comes out in some decisions that I like to make in terms of what I paint, or like, for example, with still life. Still life is an extension of the things that I'm interested in, observing, looking at historically, or in our modern times. Like in the garden, I have a extensive garden, and I'm growing all these fruits and vegetables, and those end up in my still life. So it's just I love a rich, interesting life, and that's why I love like these conversations when we're talking together about people like you that are really highly engaged, want to do different things, not content with just doing the same thing day in day out. Have multiple projects that are going on at the same time. You want to kind of really suck all the marrow out of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. So
and make observations.
how have you okay, so for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to name off a few things that I know of that you've done successfully. So obviously you've made a great career as a painter. You developed Strata, which is a company that sells these great Pashad boxes. And then you've developed VisionX Live, which is something actually coming up next month, which is this enormous conference online with hundreds of artists from all over the world that present. And then you're the co-founder of Sentient Academy. So, did I miss anything as far as your businesses?
I think for the most part that covers kind of the main
Okay.
things. I have my hands on other things, but that's
Yeah.
all that really kind of
So,
matters.
the
Yeah.
ones we would know about, right? The ones you're public with. So, how do you decide when something is worth your time? Because clearly you're a great artist and you do beautiful paintings. And I know you've talked a little bit about the anxiety, and you and I have talked about this. I deal with the same thing. I work myself into like an anxious tizzy, and then like I need to slow it down. But so, how do you decide when building a house in Italy is a bad idea and developing the Strata easel company is a good idea? Like, how do you work
Yeah.
through that in your life?
Usually, my wife is kind of a trigger mechanism, in
Oh,
terms of
really?
like total ridiculous. But I do have to fight back about some things that everybody was telling me that Strata was a dumb idea, and so I pushed hard on that. But yeah, no, that's a great question, because there are some ideas that, and I would argue, some people say, well, this idea wouldn't take that much time. And what I would say is every idea, if you're going to pursue it in the right way, takes about the same amount of time, which is a lot of time,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot. That's the reality of it. That means even if you're studying earthworms, it's going to take all your time, you know, or if, yeah,
If you're
uh,
going to be any good at it.
any, yeah, exactly. And so that's one of the challenges that somebody like Da Vinci had, is like abandoning paintings and maybe not doing as many paintings as they would have loved to do, or because maybe he'd go in and you'd really focus on one particular thing for a little while. I guess I call them micro obsessions, but you want to get good at it, or you want to understand it. You want
Mm-hmm.
to really uncover it. And I, at the beginning of my career, I jump into things a little bit and maybe waste some of my energy. And so part of it, I do tell myself, like this house idea is, it's fun to muse over, and talk about over a few drinks or whatever, and talk about with different people. But at the end of the day, is it worth giving up X, Y, and Z for it? And is that going to ultimately, increase your happiness or increase the life that you want to live? And it's always gone back to, the main thing is I want to have a creative life. I still want to keep painting. I still want to, make sure my kids are in, a good, healthy place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why I think having a family, having a relatively large family of 4 kids, that gives me a little bit of grounding to where I can't have all these. I'm pretty certain if I wasn't married, I didn't have kids, that you would see I would be maybe a serial entrepreneur, would have 12 businesses or things like that, and be doing all of that on top of painting. But at the end of the day, I want to read stories to my kids at night
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So that's kind of the filter where enough's enough. As far as, making money and things like that, I don't think about that much really. Just my activities and the things I'm interested in allow me to at least have enough to where we're okay. And that's good enough for me. I don't have any ambitions to be a wealthy person, but all I want to be able to do is to be creative, right? And when you're really stressed, maybe about finances or things like that, I know some artists going through that, and me as a younger artist went through that. I know it's harder to be creative when you're extremely stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel very fortunate in a spot where I can do some exploring. The whole science fiction fantasy thing that I've been doing is kind of a result of being able to have some of that time to just kind of go down some of these rabbit holes, these interests that I have, because I'm not I'm not concerned about the financial side of it. I just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Pure intellectual. It's somewhere where I can just live inside my head and kind of think, what if? And take all those experiences that I've had traveling around the world, things I've seen, things I've experienced, things I've felt, and just kind of see where that process kind of takes me.
Yeah. And you keep referring to all these things as part of your creative life. Um, do you see these other businesses and painting as equally creative? Or I mean, in other words, do you see Strata Easel and Sentient Academy, for example, as an art form? And do you treat them in the same, is your creative process similar to that of making a painting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. I don't see any difference. So, for example, hanging a show, hanging a show is the art is the same as doing the actual painting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way it looks on the wall is still the art. You're
Mm-hmm.
still doing the art. I think that's that's something that I see a lot of artists will spend all this time on making a beautiful painting and then just slap a frame on it, throw it up there, and I just wonder, wow, why? When did he stop? Why did they stop becoming an artist?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, to think about the whole process all the way through, and even that means the say you drop it off to a client, the art is still happening.
Yeah.
It's the conversation you're having, the stories you're telling, the way you're listening to the person you're talking to, and what they're feeling and responding to that. That's all part of the art as well. So I don't think art, at least in my view, art ever stops from when you go to bed and when you wake up. It's always creative life is always a big part of it, and even the way you have people over. and the experience you create. I try and create experiences when we have people over at our house to
Mm-hmm.
have to come away having had a good experience. So yeah, I definitely see, like, with Strata, with the easel experience, even the touch of the metal, having real materials. Uh, Things that I've thought about too is the fact that aluminum is recyclable too. There's this kind of green aspect to it. One thing that never set well with me fully, even though it's a nice substance or surface, is we have a plastic that we have the inner palette
Mm-hmm.
is high density polyethylene plastic. But what we are working on doing is changing that, and we've got a really good surface now of bamboo,
Oh.
and so a glassy surface on it. And bamboo is much more sustainable material, and so again, that's a part of the art where you think what we're doing is fine, but how can we elevate what we are doing to the next level? And so we were searching for all kinds of materials, and of course, there's also glass, but glass has its issues with weight
Mm-hmm.
and chatter, stuff like that. And so, how can we? So we've looked through a lot of different substances, basically, in order to kind of create that experience. And what that reminds me of is there's that story about Steve Jobs talking about when you're a cabinet. His dad was a cabinet maker. Do you put good wood on the back panel, the panel that nobody can see, back in the back of the cupboard, or do you just put crappy stuff back there? And his argument was, no, you put a good panel back there.
Mm-hmm.
You put something that is as high quality as anything you got in the front. And I like that. I like that sentiment. I think when you see somebody that does a high level of craft, they do think about all those kinds of things. You turn to the back of the painting, and it's in, there's some interesting elements to it or aspects to it. And so that I think that is, like I said, part of that creative lifestyle is that it's a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching life, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I was in art school, well, a university, hardly an art school, but in an art department, and there was this sort of cloud of sentiment that art was on this higher creative plane, that like painting was this like creative, um the ultimate creative goal to be a painter. But as someone who makes
Mm-hmm.
other things and is problem solving in other ways, I've found that there's there's it's just another craft, right? I mean, it's a great craft that can do a lot for people, make people feel good, and make people enjoy their walls, and so on. But creativity is so much deeper than any one medium, I think, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think we kind of do that. Like, what's the best medium? Is sculpture more important
Yeah, yeah,
than painting, or vice versa, right? You have these kind of silly conversations about that, and I don't really buy it. There could be a plumber that could be a total artist, right?
right, right. I agree.
Just the way they handle themselves, and it could be the most beautiful set of pipes you've ever seen, but it is just a mindset. And as I go throughout Italy, you go through these cathedrals and see the just magnificent, architecture. You see the friezes, you see the faux painting, you see just the frescoes. Well, what is the best part of it? And a lot of
Yeah.
times, Michelangelo gets all the credit, but what about Brunelleschi and his contribution, right? And or Ghiberti and his contribution. It's all of it that really builds up on each other and adds to this magnificent whole. And so that's what's so amazing. And I love studying, obviously, Florence, because what I love about it is the society, the entire society, and what the Medici family helped create was an entire town that was all into beauty, you know, and all into creating magnificent, wonderful things that for hundreds of years after people are still interested in. And I have to admit, I came back from Italy and was a little bummed out
Because you came back
coming
to
back.
ugly America.
I mean, just it's just not quite, you know, when you're passing sculptures and fountains and,
Yeah.
um, you know, even the food and the culinary genius that has been handed down. It's a higher realm. It really feels like this higher realm to me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's part of a little piece of me that wants to go buy a house in Sicily. So, but I guess to some degree, I just need to be content with, you know, at least once a year or so going over there and kind of filling my bucket again with things. But I would like to see, I think in America, we still have so much more that we could be doing, right? To beautify um, and to make things more engaging visually
Yeah.
and build with materials that last. You know, I just love stone, and I wish we would use stone a little bit more as a medium. Some of the things like stucco and other stuff that just doesn't have that same feel
Yeah.
as materials that are more natural, right?
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned a Medici family, and you know, the way I perceive your life, I think is similar to mine and some others that I've spoken to in that because in today's day and age, we don't have a Medici. I mean, that approach to art, that whole business model, as far as I know, doesn't exist. At least it's rare. Um,
Yeah.
so you, to me, it seems to me that you, in a way, are your own Medici in that you're putting yourself in a position to be able to do what you want, how you want, in the best way possible by doing these other businesses and by just broadening your scope of influence in a way, or not even that, but even broadening your financial scope. It's you're your own Medici in a way.
Well, yeah, and I did realize at a certain point that yeah, it wasn't coming. It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, there was no benefactor that was going to come in my life. And even you know, a gallery can also act as a bit of a hamper sometimes to a creative life.
It can.
Now, I don't want to bad galleries because I do have some great relationships with some galleries and things like that. But most of them, the reason why I have you know, at least who I'm working with right now, and it's not a large number, you know, it's a small number of galleries, is because they allow me to do whatever I want to do, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they trust that that's going to be okay to do
Right.
that. Because I think at the end of the day, when I have somebody telling me what to do, and I struggle with commissions are really hard for me. I kind of need that freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
I need that produces that kind of low grade anxiety while I'm working, and I second guess everything, and I hate that feeling, right? So even when I do a commission, I'll say, "Yeah, I'll paint this, and if you do like it, great, buy it. But if you don't like it, that's totally fine, because I'm going to paint it how I want it to be." You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's that commission kinds of ends up. It's kind of on those terms. And if somebody, I haven't had anybody walk away yet, but it's an important mental trick for me to do to say, you know, I can sell this somewhere else if you're not into it.
Yeah.
But uh, you know, and so basically the idea that I can kind of talk about sizing and if they want a certain size or something like that, but that's kind of where it stops.
Yeah.
It's like, well, just kind of go from there. You know, you got the kind of space you wanted at. But for the most part, I do maybe one or two commissions a year. That's it. I try to do as few as possible so I can just kind of go and wander out the door and get lost, run out of gas somewhere, and just you know, paint and enjoy uh, you know, what life has to offer. So that's really kind of, in some ways, my life purpose it's not, at the end of the day, did I become the most famous artist in the world? I do. That doesn't. I'm not really as worried about that. I do want to have these. What I'm looking for is authentic experience.
Hmm.
So, and even when I travel to Europe, I'm looking for authenticity as well. So, for example, I found someone that packed their mozzarella in myrtle leaves because that's how they did it traditionally. They tied it up with a couple of these ropes, and the fresh mozzarella, instead of the plastic bags, they put it, just wrap it in these leaves that were moistened, and that's how they kind of served it. And it was just this beautiful thing. Here it is, it's just mozzarella, but it was, in my view, a work of art. It was beautiful, and so that, it's the best mozzarella I've ever had in my life. Maybe not because it tasted the best, but it just created this experience. And so I go out and go on these farms and look for some recipes and things, some secrets about how to live that kind of beautiful, authentic life. And tell you what, we found these people that were making pickling zucchini, and that's the way I'm going to have zucchini from now on. It
Really?
was
What
just
is
amazing.
that? Just is it like pickled or something else?
Yeah, so it's pickled, and then but it's pickled like a fresh pickle,
Yeah.
and they can it in a specific way. I'd have to kind of show you the process of it. So I
Yeah.
was just quizzing him about it, understand all of it, and they're just wonderful. So
Hmm.
I'll have you try some when I'm gonna
So are you
we're
a
gonna eat
cook too
this
then?
this a little bit. I'm more of a I'm not a cook in a sense. There's a lot better cooks than me, but I am interested in certain specific things that. So I'm not like a general wonderful cook, but I have been trying to make the perfect
Hmm.
spaghetti or ragu sauce for about 25.
Really? You're on a mission to make the perfect spaghetti sauce.
Yes, yeah. So, and I had a master that I had dinner at his house every Sunday for several months, and while I was in Milan, Italy, and he's the guy that I've always compared myself to. So I'm always kind of trying to source the right ingredients and just the right mix to get just the perfect thing. So just things like that, and that translates into your art. I think when you approach life in a way of curiosity, but also the desire to improve, right, and push forward, incrementally, be willing to fail multiple times
Mm-hmm.
to get to the thing you're after. I totally embrace failure, and I failed multiple times on lots of different things, and I'm totally okay with that. It's just the learning process, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of these paintings, people ask me, what's your favorite painting? What's the best painting you ever done? And I don't even see it like that. I see my paintings as just leaves of a book in a journal,
Oh,
kind of,
really?
right? Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that for me it's more looking at the complete life of an artist rather than just the work. So sometimes we compartmentalize and just say this, just look at the work of the artist, and at the end of the day, maybe that's what an art historian, that's all they're going to kind of look at, and maybe the things that influence that work of art. But I find it much more fascinating looking at the whole artist and seeing various layers and aspects of who they were, and what they believed, what motivated them, and how that influenced their art. So at the end of the day, if the accolades or things like that happen, I'm not as interested in as I am in each day being a little bit different than the last one, and improvement happening, or jumping into something that's new and interesting, different to explore. I never see myself just producing the same type of work over and over again. And I
Yeah.
know some artists have done that. They kind of achieve a certain level once they leave school, and then they kind of produce that thing over and over and over again throughout their whole career. And I just don't see myself that's where I look at Picasso, and I do like one aspect of his career, and that's, he constantly kept changing his abstractions, right? Um, I don't have a lot of wonderful things to say about Picasso usually,
Me neither.
but that's one of them that I think. I mean, I'm okay with this idea of artists changing and evolving and growing,
Yeah.
although I know the market kind of wants you to stay in a certain place.
Yeah. So let me,
I mean, that's what a lot of artists, or people that told me when I was younger and in school, is like, get good at a thing and do that thing,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So, okay, let me backtrack a little bit to about 3 or 4 minutes ago in what you were saying. So you were talking about how you don't really measure the artist by any particular painting, but more like the thoughts of the artist, the experiences of the artist, the overall accomplishments of the artist. So would you say that any one painting is not really the most important art, but the artist himself is the art to you?
Yeah, I think it's the life more,
Yeah.
the complete life, the life force of an artist, and so that means not only what they created, but also maybe what they inspired others to do,
Yeah.
and how they motivated other people to do things. I think that's part of why Sentient Academy and why VisionX Live is, I was seeing, and this is for my own soul and my own needs, and instead of seeing what was, I wanted to see what I would like to have happen. And what I was seeing is compartmentalization, where figurative portrait painters hang out together, landscape painters hang out together, digital artists hang out together, all these different little groups and stuff like that. And I was going to all of these different conferences, totally different stuff. And what I wanted to see is actually more of an interaction between all these things, because I love seeing cross-pollination. I love seeing, somebody that is a figurative painter goes and paints landscapes. Like, it's really cool to see that you've done that. You've gone out, do plein air painting, even built a whole band to do that,
Hmm.
which is amazing. Um, and being willing to go out of your comfort zone. So we're very tribal by nature, right? Humans are very tribal, want to be in part of their tribe and see where they fit in the status social hierarchy of each of these tribes. But for me, something that's more interesting, more dynamic, is having different people from different tribes coming and interacting with one another. That's dynamic. That's interesting. That grows. You never know what's going to happen outside or with those combinations. So I look at somebody like Zoe Frank, and I love the fact that she's blended several different layers of styles. She spoke last year, was kind of our keynote speaker, one of the keynote speakers, and we picked her because she's a perfect example of somebody that adding abstract elements, patterns with figurative work, and you know, dissolving the form, bringing it back in certain areas. A lot of things that she's kind of mixing together to create something new. And so that's kind of fun to see that. It's also fun to see artists that go back and forth between using digital work and using traditional work. Artists that are kind of hybrids like that can do both. And Dave Dibble is a great example of that, where he has this early career in animation, then uses those techniques of a lighting designer to take his reference and light it in really interesting ways, and then use that as a reference for painting. So to create some unique lighting things in his traditional work. So that's the kind of stuff that I think, at least for me, engages me on a higher level than if every person just gets up and says, my shadows are thin, I paint them thin, and then I put thicker paint in the lights. Or,
Hmm.
things where you hear it like 20 times in a row, because everybody's kind of doing the same thing,
Right.
for the
Yeah.
most part. Where, what if you had somebody come up and say, I put my lights in first and I put them in really thin, and then I put my shadows in really thick. you know, everybody'd have a heart attack in a realistic.
That's funny.
So, but that's what I'm looking for,
Yeah.
is somebody that does that and then pulls it off
Well, that's the
somehow.
key, though. That's the one thing I wanted to point out in that it's not like you're
You got to pull
just,
it off.
yeah, it's not like you're just throwing the net in the ocean and whatever comes up in the net you're putting in VisionX Live, because you're
No.
still very selective, because as far as I can tell, every single person, even though they're in all these different disciplines, they're all very good at what they do and they're excellent craftsmen or craftswomen, you know. So
So that's the bottom line.
that ties them all together.
Yeah.
What's that?
Craftsmanship is craftsmanship's the bottom line there,
Yeah,
right? Craftsmanship and caring about what they do and taking it to a high level.
right.
So they don't necessarily have to paint or draw or sculpt or digitally create in a specific way. It just needs, a big part of it's high level. We're looking for thinkers, not just practitioners, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the thinking part that when we're asking questions like, do this because it looks good, you're saying, why do I do this? Why is it necessary for me to do this? And what does it do for me, or what is it conveying to the viewer? You're asking the whys, right?
Mm-hmm.
The deeper reasons behind why do you get up each day and go paint in the first place? And, you know, why are you spending hours and hours and hours on this certain maneuver or something, this certain mode of painting and this certain technique? Why do you set up the canvas the way you do? Why do you set up the lighting the way you do? Why do you choose the objects that you do? Or why do you abstract this area? Why not abstract it? Why sharp edge? Why soft edge? Instead of just, that's how it appears, so that's why you should do it.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to be still to be explored. And you know, one thing that's kind of exciting too is there's an element. I've been working on a painting that that the initial imagery was created using AI. And so I'm figuring out some different textural. I'm developing techniques to try and mimic some of the AI, some of the things that AI has done.
Wait, what do you mean by AI? That's a pretty broad statement.
So there are applications now that with text you can put in a bunch of a word salad basically, and then it spits out stuff. So you can blend things like you know, Michelangelo with Richard Dievenkorn. You could just do something like that, or Van Gogh. And so what does that look like? So then it spits out through all its algorithms, grabs some imagery off the internet, and then, you know, turn on the blender, then it kind of spits it out.
Yeah.
And it's developed some textures that I've frankly not seen before. And so trying to replicate some of those textures is maybe an interesting element that will end up in some of my work at some point.
Well, that is really interesting.
I'm working on all kinds of different tools that, even, you know, current tools, past tools that could, you know, take art further. It could be a dead end, but I'm willing to spend, you know, a couple of days on it to see if it might go somewhere, and then we'll kind of see from there.
Right.
Make another assessment. Is this worth continuing on, or is it, you have to jettison it? So those are the kinds of things. I love that kind of exploration. That's what gets me up every day, is like, it's not the commission. it's the ability to be creative and try something new, and you know, do some experimentation. Now, again, like you said, there's certainly a lot of crap out there too, and you have to be just somewhat discerning about, you know, what you take, what you let go. And but again, that's to your own temperament, and you know, making that decision, wading through that kind of stuff. Again, I've hit some dead alleys, you know, or blind alley, I guess you'd call them. But it's like the light bulb thing with Thomas Edison. He tried all these different filaments till he gets the right one, right? That he's tried over 1,000 to get the right one that will make the light bulb work. To some degree, you have to do that as kind of an artist and an inventor type of personality. So some artists are more virtuosos, right, where they hone their craft, and it's less about ideas and more about just the virtuosity of their ability. But other artists are more thinkers, maybe more composers, where they're moving things around and constantly thinking about why this there and why that there. And there's a lot of repainting going on. I'm just talking about maybe a painter because that's what I relate to most. There's layers, there's decisions being made and taken off and then put back on, and maybe multiple times that's happening. I think those people are a little bit more interesting, and they also have this layer of the intellect, like what are they trying to say with the work? And so even though your decision may break with reality, what you see, it is something that is more going with a feeling or an intellectual thought. And so that's why you break fidelity with nature, right? Maybe for the good of the whole painting, you break fidelity with nature. So that kind of stuff I find really fascinating, is when you say, yes, I see the form turning there, but I'd rather have it flat because it does it does something for the imagery. So you're making a choice to break with nature so that, I don't know, whatever it is you're trying to say.
Well,
maybe it's you want sharper edges so you're angrier, or it's like an angrier emotion that you're doing, or it's a more forceful thing than if you soften an edge, something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's really,
I know
like that.
You can get.
Well, I want you to show me some examples of that, because that's really interesting to me. And I know you do that in your work because I've painted with you and I can see that you clearly take artistic license, which frankly is why they use the word artistic. It is what makes art, right? When you add your own elements and own creative decisions to the work. But I'd like you to, if you don't mind, maybe you could point some out. So let's see.
Well, let's see. You could go to let's go to recent work.
Okay.
So let's go to Evening Lights of Loire Valley because it's a more representational piece.
Okay. Yeah. So tell me about this one.
Unfortunately, the texture of it you can't appreciate. It's a large pane, like 3648, right?
Yeah.
But if zooming in on it, it's the paint is in varying degrees of thickness depending on where you're at in it. Also, what I've done is I've reorganized I've kind of cheated the perspective on the river, and somebody look at this and say, "Oh, you just copied what you saw."
You would
but
think
every single thing in you think, right?
That's good.
But
though.
Everything has, yeah. But there's nothing in here that is what I saw in the reference. I mean, everything's adjusted.
Everything.
Every single thing in it.
No kidding.
Everything is adjusted. So that's even the color, temperature of the sky. Of course, the main idea. I mean, this was done from a 8x10 plein air sketch.
Okay.
So I did this at Loire, France, and I'm looking at the big, broad shapes. Where this is, a series of triangular shapes that I'm utilizing, that culminates in those two towers, the steeple there.
Yeah.
Even the reflection, I've fudged the reflection. It's not how the reflection would actually work.
You mean from the torches or the lights up here on the bridge? These reflections here?
The lights. No, so look at the chapel, the church up there above.
Yeah.
And then see how it reflects down below.
Oh,
that's
down
not
here.
An actual.
And down here.
Down there, right? So I can't have a
Yeah.
strong reflection on the bottom part like I with the type of water where it's a little bit more calm.
Mm-hmm.
You would actually it's very you'd see the reflection very clearly,
No
but
kidding.
compositionally it doesn't. And so I had to work to soften the edge in a way that I could convey the idea of the points going down to the water without actually conveying, without actually doing it. So
And still
psychologically, I
maintaining the level of realism, like it's still convincing and naturalistic.
yeah, right. So that's that. There's an example, and all these lights, they're all organized in a star pattern or a way that is feels haphazard.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't copy any of the light positions, right? They're all in an arbitrary way so that the spacing is, there's variety in the spacing, and also in the reflections, they would all be pretty uniform, but I've changed the brightness of each one, also the length of each one. Uh,
Hmm.
so they're all changed, right? So, the clouds are all arbitrarily put in how I wanted to design them. The water ripples obviously were. Those boats did not exist, and there was a different kind of boat there, but I added some boats and also created the type of textures that I wanted on them. Just they're basically shapes that I wanted in specific positions.
Hmm.
So again, everything in this painting is a fiction
Hmm.
based on the feeling reality I got from my little 8 by 10 sketch.
That's interesting. So did you use photo reference for the detail or just the sketch?
I did use photo reference for I think mainly I needed it for the bridge
Yeah, because there's a lot of
because of
detail in
way
that.
the ellipse, basically the ellipse of the bridge, and
Yeah.
how that would work. But again, I also fudged that because bridges look terrible in photographs. They are, because they're so warped in their perspective when you get a
Mm-hmm.
small photo of them. It doesn't look natural, and so I faked the perspective of it
Hmm.
in order to make it work.
Wow.
So I had to make adjustments as well. So there's a lot of things there. And so my work on imaginative realism has greatly helped, even though you would think, what is Brian doing wasting his time painting spaceships or castles or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, it helps in something like this to convey a sense of realism, even though I'm just completely redesigning it.
So
So
what are your thoughts in balancing these two potential priorities for a landscape painter? I mean, one landscape painter might say, my job as a landscape painter, or maybe my desire as a landscape painter is to capture a sense of place, like almost like a documentary artist going out and saying, this is where I was, this is that place, and here's how I captured it, versus saying, I'm looking for the most beautiful picture. Like it seems to me that you're more interested in making the best picture possible and less interested in place. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
yeah, and I always hate when people ask me when I paint a cityscape, they're like, what street is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just like, I don't know. I wasn't looking at the street signs. I don't care. I just happened to be standing in a place where a car wouldn't hit me, and that looked cool, or the shapes and the design and the spacing. So, I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff so
Right.
much. I can't even remember the town that this was. Even though I did sit there, it was just about. I like the kind of the spiky shapes coming with this kind of long horizontal. So I've got a little bit of a cross there. It's almost like those spires sit right on the golden section, right, of that
Mm-hmm.
landscape,
Oh yeah, that's true. In both directions.
right?
So have you ever been in a place where you said to yourself, this place needs to just be painted just as it is? Never. Wow, that's interesting. It's such a contrast because there are so many artists, not so many, but there are probably it might be split down the middle. I don't know, but there are many artists that are very true to place. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting how there can be such different priorities in the same subject matter. And I think both are valid.
Well,
It's just interesting.
yeah, no, I know. And I know there's like the site size painters too,
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and I tried that. And I understand that. What I found is that I was trading emotion for complete emotional response for entire intellect.
Mm,
And I think there's a value though in that. Um, but I wouldn't want to do that as a life practice.
right.
Moving things around and composing is one of the great joys I feel of a landscape painter.
Yeah.
And if you are depriving yourself of that, sure people will clap. Wow, you copied that. Copied that perfectly. It looks as good or better than a photograph. You
Yeah.
know, I just for me is did it evoke an emotion? And I guess I side with um, George Innes on that idea that the purpose of good landscape painting is to convey an emotion
That's
rather
great.
than some
Yeah.
sort of a. So
Well,
I kind of side on that.
let's see if is there another one that
Go
you can talk about.
go, go to instead of the recent work, go
Okay.
to archive.
I love your Asian, I don't know what country this is in, but the ones that you've painted in various countries in Asia.
Well, we can talk about that for a second if you want to pull up that painting.
Which one? This one up here?
Sure.
Okay.
So
Let me
if
see
you
how I
look
can
at
fit
the
that on there.
writing, I even had some Chinese people like, "Wow, your writing's amazing," and I have no idea what it says, and I wasn't even copying anything. So basically, it's complete gibberish,
Hmm.
right? There's no in that banner there. The writing is I just made it up,
Hmm.
and and I think that's an example of visually conveying the idea rather than just exactly trying to say the fruit costs. This is a bargain fruit market
Right.
or whatever it was supposed to say. Maybe it's a party slogan like "Be a good citizen" or something like that. So what I wanted to convey here is this is a fruit market. It has some colorful aspects in a very dingy, very developing world environment, and so my mark making and things reflect all of that, the grit of the place. And when you're in a market like this, you definitely feel the grit. There's germs everywhere. You really feel this sense of there's just like overpowering amount of visual information in places like that. And that was what I was trying to convey with something like this. So what I did is even on the things aren't necessarily perfect, like the roundness of the forms of the Chinese lanterns could
Mm-hmm.
certainly be more fleshed out. But the brevity of which I captured this, I think conveys better all those kinds of feelings of the layers of textures, things kind of haphazard, falling apart, stuff like that. I just feel like it conveys it a whole lot more
Oh, I
than if
agree.
I went in and spent another, 5 or 6 days on this perfecting everything. So it's just kind of choices that I make based on the emotion that I'm trying to create rather than the extrinsic fact of the imagery or whether those fruits trying to describe, okay, this is eggplant, this is tomato. Like if you look at the fruit there, I haven't really told you. You can kind of make some educated guesses, but I haven't really told you what kind of fruit that is
Mm-hmm.
because I found when you paint all of the fruit all perfect, it will lose that quality, that initial quality that I was after.
Yeah. And it's very thin and washy, which I think adds to that grittiness you're talking about. Like the foreground is just a wash.
Right.
Yeah, it's a kind of
Yep.
amazing how little paint there is on it.
A wash actually mimics the patina of all the surfaces a lot better than if I use thick paint. Having these washes, almost using oil paint like a watercolor. Again, talking about those ideas of cross-pollination, I've studied a lot of watercolorists and done some watercolor myself in order to use oils a little bit more like watercolor. That's what I've done here
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of these applications, washes, and I haven't really gone back in with opaque paint afterwards in a lot of these areas. And what that's created is these patinas, these accidentals, this kind of natural feeling of weathering and age that I found so interesting and uh, very visceral in places like this. And so that's that was kind of the idea of what I was trying to convey here.
So, okay, yeah, man, it's gorgeous. I want to look at one. Let me look at one more of your landscapes here. Oh my gosh, let's look at this one. You know what? This is amazing because the perspective on a boat like this is very difficult, and you did it. It
Yeah,
looks effortless.
well, it's yeah one of those pieces where you don't change anything, you just kind of put it out. Again, I could have corrected a few things. The yellow boat's a little elongated. There's, but again, I like the idea of the brevity of the stroke. There is something I find compelling about, putting it down and leaving it like you have, like what you find in plein air work. You just, lay the stroke down in your first impression and kind of leave it. And so nothing here has been really modified all that much. It's really just an observation's made and a friend told me this and I like it where it's like I may not be right, but I'm going to be certain about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm just going to commit. And having that when people ask me like how do you paint loose? There's a massive amount of it is just having that confidence of
Hmm.
just placing and leaving it. So
Yeah.
if you're going back in and back in and back in, um, sure you'll get to maybe a more refined solution, but at the same time, you're going to give up all that freshness and spontaneity that can happen. And so that's what I'm always in my work, kind of that back and forth between the spontaneous and the refined. So a couple of strokes at the end, maybe a little bit more clearly thought. I'm very rapid painter at the beginning, and then slow down, and a couple, towards the end, obviously. But I do try not to. I do try and hold myself back from going in and rendering everything out. I could do
Yeah.
that, but I find my goals wanting to stay into that place where things are freshly laid down and then left.
Yeah.
So and then move on to another idea, another leaf in the journal, another page in the journal
Right. Right.
is kind of what I.
So yeah, you mentioned this idea of confidence though, in order to keep it loose. I mean, but don't you think that that confidence, if acquired too early without the drawing basis, might cause some chaos in a painting?
Yeah, there's a lot of barked paintings, where and people think maybe this is an easier way of painting, and I'm here to tell you I don't. It's
No.
not at all. It's not it's not an easy way of painting, and so I think you have to have. There's a lot of discipline, right? That you over the years to get to a point of this of brevity, right? Uh, and so you can't just immediately jump towards it. Um, but one of the things that can help you is using a much bigger brush than you think you need.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to use that brush in ways that a smaller brush, when you have that tendency to render, keeps you from rendering, and that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think bigger brushes, and then also having uh, a lot of paint on the palette. But going back to this idea of discipline, behind the, there's a ton of drawing. I even did a lot of figure drawing and stuff like that, and probably would still do it if I if I didn't, the things that I described to you
Hmm.
before,
If you didn't hate people
I
so much.
probably would.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Even if I have somebody in my studio, I know you're able to totally deal with that. I had an assistant for a while that kind of helped me with things, and it was too. I don't know. It was hard for me,
Hmm.
and so I just can't have it. I need to kind of have quiet, and I start worrying if they're having a good time, even though I'm
Yeah.
employing them, you know. And so, uh, you know, that's one thing. Like learning how to paint in a brief sort of way. I think still life is still one of the best tools to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing you can do is kind of set a timer. Like, what can you achieve in 20 minutes?
Hmm.
And start making those decisions. And then you can find out if you are understanding how to hit the right shadow value versus the light value. Do you know where that soft edge needs to be? Do you know where the hard edge needs to be? Are you understanding this so that in 20 minutes you could get the right relationship? We're not talking about perfect refinement, but if you get the basic right relationship on an onion or orange or whatever, light side, shadow side, or face, right relationship, light side, shadow side. Can you get those two values correctly in 20 minutes where they're right? And I imagine, something like, if you were painting, you have so many years of doing it that it probably wouldn't, you saw a face and you just had 20 minutes to just get that relationship right. You could easily do it. You probably do it in 5. And that's because of all the discipline that you've had over the years. And so that's a similar kind of thing with landscape painting too, or cityscape, or whatever you're interested in. Is if you have that familiarity with it, you understand how to see value and how to interpret it into an actual tone that you mix and make, you can paint rather rapidly.
Yeah. You had said something earlier about using a bigger brush, and it reminded me of, I don't know if you remember this, but the time I took your workshop, I don't know, it was maybe 10 years ago. It's been a while. And we went to lunch
It has
after,
been.
and we were talking about how, or I brought up how strange it was that I was the only professional artist that was studying with you in that workshop out of 15 people. And yet I was the only one using the brushes you recommended and the only one following your
Yes.
instruction. Do you remember that? Oh man. And I just thought, why are these people taking this workshop? They're not doing anything he's saying. But then I've since taught my own workshops and I found that that's not an unusual thing. But
It's just so uncomfortable. I think people try it maybe even for a half hour and they're like, I can't do this. Let me go back to my default setting.
yeah,
You know,
well, it's
oh,
intimidating. It's
so,
intimidating. You want to go back to what's comfortable. So you, to ease your that intimidation a little bit, maybe. But another question I have for you that I've always wondered about this, well, especially since I've started trying to dip my toe in landscape painting, is how do you, especially if you plan on changing things, um, how do you know when you're looking at a good subject? How do you find a good subject? I find I could drive around for hours not knowing what's a good subject. But you're going to change it
yeah.
anyway. So I mean, how do you know when you've seen one?
That's a great question because when I teach a landscape painting, say I taught a studio one where we're actually not even plein air, but we're doing photographs. 99% of the time, somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience in landscape painting will show me an unpaintable photograph. They're just even starting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah.
So I think if you're one of the things that I've said before is look for something that paints itself. And this is kind of what I mean by that is that you're looking for contrast in the midground and you're looking for strong, clean, clear shapes. You're looking for something that's in the midground because what I find is that the foreground, the whole purpose of the foreground is to lead your eye into the midground. And so that's why you're going to have to rearrange everything anyway. And so I don't worry so much about what that foreground is going to look like because I'm going to have to add or delete or thread something through that anyway. If I find something that's great in the midground, that's usually where your focal point is going to be on any given landscape. And so, what are natural contrasts? Well, water creates a natural contrast. Different material, whether it's rock against tree. Tree is an upright plane, so it's generally going to be dark. Rocks, depending on their value or color, are going to be lighter. So you could have a contrast between those two if you have rocks against trees, if it's a natural landscape, or if you have something where there's buildings or things in the way, you're going to have tree, which is a dark shape, against maybe a white building or something that's light. So water, building, rock, you're looking for contrast because that's what creates focal point, right?
Yeah.
The natural area of contrast. So that's what I'm going around looking for, is something that has contrast. And if you have great looking shapes along with that, then you've made your job way easier, and that painting will paint itself. If you have contrast, but the shapes are kind of so-so, and you have to really design everything from kind of the ground up, you're going to make it a lot tougher on yourself. I think this is why I think winter can be both easy and hard. Winter is easy in the sense that it's like snow. Creates a natural strong contrast between, upright planes like trees and the ground. But one of the things that people struggle with is the shapes. You got bare trees, and so they think they need to paint all the individual branches instead of looking at it as a shape. And so you have to imagine the shape of that tree rather than, thinking about all the individual branches. And so that takes some imagination to do that.
Okay. So I'm looking at a couple of your paintings here. So, and I see exactly what you're saying. So the house is the midground. The foreground has no contrast. And a few of these little areas back here would be the background, and the sky is the background. So yeah,
right.
that
so
makes
you've
a
got
lot of sense. Yeah.
a dark light object, strong dark, strong light. The roof, the shadow underneath the roof creates your contrast. There's your focal point. Plus, you got a sharp hit with the barn, and then you've got midtones in the foreground, midtone in the background.
Right.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, it's easier said than done. So, let's talk about your imaginative work. This is really cool, and it does remind me of Star Wars. So, is this completely out of your imagination?
So, yeah, just completely out of my head, and it's something where I wanted this feeling of this kind of dappled light going through a kind of a canyon sort of thing, and insinuating there might be some movement in the kind of the back there. And the focal point in this isn't terribly strong, but I do like just the way the light is raking across through this canyon, and the kind of feeling of, I stopped because I liked the freshness of it. And it also felt complete enough that it could make a statement. It has atmosphere, it has light, maybe a little bit of movement in it. And so I was like, I conveyed what I wanted to convey. And massive scale.
Yeah.
So, there's this in Star Wars where they're going through two parts of the Death Star, and that's the kind of idea, is this mega structure, and you're kind of looking through it. And it's so big that there's atmosphere in it. And then you look at just on an abstract level, each of these beams that cross the canyon are going in slightly different directions. They are, the way I've designed it, I feel like it's very natural. Like it could be, if we rotated it on its side, it could look like a forest. It's beams in their different directions and different ways they're doing it. So, I think on an abstract level, it reads, and this is what I was after. I was after a science fiction based scene that is an abstract painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I see a lot of really slick renders stuff, in the movies, and I don't have those. I'm not working for any client. I'm just doing this for my own personal enjoyment and exploration. And so I don't need to finish it to the nth degree. I conveyed what I wanted to convey. And so, that's how I did it. One thing that's interesting, I painted it this way, and this is how I like it, in this vertical position. But the person who bought it from me liked it better in the horizontal position. So,
Oh,
but I put two wires in it so that they could hang it. They could hang it vertically or horizontally or however they wanted to.
oh, and that didn't
That's
bother
been kind
you.
of
You
fun.
weren't like, no, it's going in vertical or else. You were okay with
No,
that.
I like it could be interpreted in
Oh,
multiple ways.
okay. That's great.
Kind of the uniqueness of this abstract design and painting.
So here's another one of your imaginative ones. Man, yeah, I can't even
So this is kind
imagine.
of based on an idea. So the idea here is I scuba dive, like I said, and going through the kelp forests, which is truly it's a transcendent experience. The kelp forests they're just incredibly beautiful. And so this is kind of like that, but in a more maybe mechanical sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see weaving through here are those fish, are those spaceships? What is that? There are these moving things going through, and then I have some kind of organic perspective lines leading you into the scene, and then just a lot of fun with the mark making, and again keeping it very fresh, not fully describing what's going on as well, leaving it up to the imagination, keeping it somewhat abstract, and that's how I like it. I like that kind of ambiguous narrative that's in this. I
Yeah.
like the fact that I haven't told. I'm not really an illustrator here. I don't need to be an illustrator. I'm not paid to be an illustrator, so I can kind of leave it where I want to leave it,
Mm-hmm.
and people can enjoy. If you see this on the wall, it's you can put it in a very modern home, and it has it's just got a kind of a cool vibe to it.
Yeah.
Uh,
What's
and you're like,
interesting to
who is
me,
this artist on
yeah.
an acid trip, kind of?
What's interesting to me is it's very abstract, and yet it has so much depth. And, I mean, it just feels like you can step into it. So it's something and nothing at the same time.
Yeah. So there's going back to the idea of you can just barf on a canvas and it's not going
Mm-hmm.
to do anything, but there are principles at work here. Like all of my cityscape training, there's linear perspective that's being felt here. There's atmosphere, years of painting layers and layers of fields or layers and layers of mountains or layers and layers of city. Uh, all of that stuff is that knowledge is being put into a painting like this. So it's not just me like completely abandoning all love and reason. There's still all those elements that are a part of it. And in each of these imaginative works, I do have these elements of there's perspective and there's atmosphere and a sense of light in all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
And so that's what I like about, or that's kind of the abstract work that I would like to see, that during the abstract movement, the abstract period of painting, the fact that they just flattened everything, there was no sense of light, there's no depth. I just think it could be much more interesting. And this is an example of what I would have liked to have seen
Yeah.
during that abstract movement. And that's kind of what I've done here. And there's people that enjoy it. I think this is kind of at a level, like I was saying, the rhythms of nature that I'm really interested in. I do recognize that this will be completely lost on 99% of the people out there. It's like artists that like to do atonal harmonies in their piano playing, or in their
Mm-hmm.
music writing.
Mm-hmm.
Most of popular culture, or people that love popular culture, are just going to look at this and think this is, or not think anything maybe, or just like this is dumb.
Yeah.
But I think some people are interested in, they've seen a ton of imagery and are kind of bored and are looking for more and other new, different things like that. I think something like this might be interesting to them
Yeah. Well, 1%
because
of
they have.
people, still a lot of people. Yeah. So no,
Well,
I think it's
unfortunately, I
gorgeous.
found enough people like it that I'm able to do it. And actually, not that that's the end goal. I don't show these in any gallery, but I'm able to find people that buy this work.
That's great. So I want to look at your still life too. Let's see. So you do this thing, I don't know, how often do you do it? It's called where you draw or paint once a day for 30 days. Remind me what that's called.
The Strata
The
Challenge is what
Strata
we call it.
Challenge. Yeah, and these
Yeah,
remind me of that because you often do these during the Strata Challenge. So yeah, tell us a little bit
these are
about
actually
that.
all done. So the only time I paint still life is during the Strata Challenge.
Oh,
And
okay.
again, I've taken that opportunity to paint these works during that challenge where every day, as an exercise, as a meditation, I set an object together and I paint it. Now, people don't have to do still life, they can do whatever they want. I've just taken the opportunity to do still life because otherwise I probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, it's
So I run
easy to
all kinds of
do
different.
it just on a pinch, right? You just grab an object, throw it on a
Yeah,
table, and go. Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
But they're very
So you're
cool.
spending an hour or two on these, and depending on the complexity or the size or whatever, and you're just making some observations, right? It's also an opportunity for me to collect some interesting things, and try out stuff that I normally wouldn't try out. It's like, well, there's a couple hours of my time, if it doesn't work out, and
Yeah.
so and things have been fun. I've discovered, I love painting bread because of if you look at the bread piece in the center there, it's the abstraction that I like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not painting bread per se, but it's the organic nature of it that interests me.
Yeah. Your bread paintings are
Yeah,
my favorite of your still lifes for sure. You can tell you really enjoy it. So tell us more about the Strata
yeah. So that
Challenge. What is that and how do you participate in it?
so I started the Strata Challenge because I would teach a workshop, and then a year later, I'd have people taking my same workshop and not improving at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got, you talk about when you're blue in the face, like you need to paint every day, right? If you're going to get better. And so I decided, like, hey, there's the Ironman challenge. There's a lot of athletic kind of things that people do for 30 days. So why don't we do um, something where we do a painting challenge? So I mean, it's been about 10 years since we did this. So this is really early on. Now there's a million different challenges out there, um, aside from the Strata challenge. But that's uh, that's that's what I found at the beginning. A couple of people were like, "Dude, paint every day for 30 days. That's too much to ask people to do." But I found that people just are so excited every time it comes up to get ready to go and do it. And so we've kind of created a nice ecosystem. We have about 8,000 people in a group on Facebook
Wow.
that paint in the Strata Challenge, and a lot of people have been able to sell some of their studies and stuff like that. And for me, I've participated in order to kind of be a cheerleader. I won't. I won't. I have to fess up. I won't be able to do it this September. I'll be in New Zealand, but I really think that it's benefited me as well. To do these kinds of you know exercises, quick exercises. I've learned a lot from all of it.
Hmm. And then you give away something, don't you? Like an easel or one of your Pashad boxes?
Yeah, we give away 5 easels, so
Five.
we give quite a
Wow.
bit of. Yeah, we give a lot of merch. There's some other people that are involved, other companies, and so we give brushes away and panels and other things too. So
Hmm.
it's just there to motivate people. But I keep telling them, don't worry if you win or not. It really is all about doing the miles and getting better. And I've some people said that it got them through cancer, chemotherapy, or other people through difficult times. Just gave them something to focus on. We do it in January when it's kind of the new year and people are kind of motivated to take on a new challenge. And then we do it in September as well. As people are kind of getting back in the school year, kind of settling down from the summer, want to refocus on their art. So those are kind of the two times that we do it. And I just found that it's been really positive for a lot of people to get over the rut of beginning, of
Mm-hmm.
starting, of being motivated. And what I feel like we create here is it's like going to class, or it's running with a whole group. And I found that my kids, it's just amazing. They get up at 5 in the morning and go running with the other cross country people. And they wouldn't do that by themselves, but since all their friends are there running, they'll go do it. And I feel like this is kind of the same thing that we've tried to create here.
Mm.
So I've really, with the Strata challenge, with the Strata easel, I've seen a problem that I've had in my own life, and I've really wanted to, even with VisionX, the whole idea of, well, let's change this. I don't like how the world's functioning. I want to see something different. Let's change it. Let's make it better. Let's improve it. And it's been fun and gratifying to do that. And so I think, when we talk about an artist's life, I think also, how we help other people is a part of that legacy too. You
Yeah.
hear about some artists that perhaps really selfishly, sure, they made these really amazing, wonderful works of art, but at the end of the day, they were just horrible to their family or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or, just abusive or whatever. I don't know. The things can happen, not always, obviously, but I think that looking at an entire artist's influence and career is kind of important. And I know that artists, even really fantastic ones, have their issues and have their skeletons in the closet. I don't necessarily fault them for that. We're all human, but at the end of the day, you want to live.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to just have people clap when you're dead,
Yeah.
right? You could
Yeah.
be buried in the pantheon, but
Yeah.
you're still dead.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of people have, when I was coming up in the art world and in college and stuff, I remember artists would always talk about how they want to leave something behind. And if you're a religious person like I am, my feeling is, well, the only thing I'm taking with me is what I learn. So it's
Right.
better what happens to me than what I leave behind. So I've always been about making myself smarter and better, right? But if you're not a religious person, it kind of is the same in the sense like, who cares if you left stuff behind? You're dead anyway. It's not going to make any difference to you. You're just eating dirt at this
Yeah.
point. So it's
Right.
an interesting aspiration, and I don't fault people for that either. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this.
Yeah. And I felt like
Oh, go ahead.
even if the studio burnt to the ground, right? I would feel, I'd be a little heartbroken for a day or two, but I think I would just feel actually relieved to some degree. I'll, I could start over and start building new things. There's nothing better than when I clean my studio and throw a bunch of old paintings or stuff away and then start fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to some degree, it could really help an artist to have their studio burned to the ground.
Oh
You kind
gosh.
of really see really important to you, and it should be, I believe, it should not be the objects in your life, the things. I really think it should be, well, how are your relationships? How do you are you enjoying life, or do you enjoy the fact that you know things that you didn't know before, or the skills you develop,
Yeah.
and all of that. And so it's kind of a little bit of a test, right? So
Yeah. I like that
kind of
perspective.
maybe kind of wrapping up here.
Yeah. No, and I want to ask you one final question. I ask everyone this. So if you could give a piece of advice to an aspiring young artist, what would it be? Now, and keep in mind that you're not your typical artist. You're an artist in so many areas. So I'd be curious on what your piece of advice would be to an artist slash entrepreneur who's just starting out.
Yeah, that is a great question. Well, if you add the entrepreneur piece to it, it's a little bit different and maybe a bit the same. But I think uh, starting and be willing to fail, persistence and failure, right, are a big part of what an artist's life is, right? I if I had the mental ability to completely ignore or the worry about whether I had talent enough to do it or not, if I could impart that gift on a young artist and say, you will never have to worry about whether you have the talent to do it or not.
Hmm.
And they could just set that aside and just go and do it. As long as they, have the self motivation, then I think they'd be just fine.
Hmm.
Because that persistence, as you're trying to find out, because here's an example. Here's what, like a pitfall. A lot of people talk to me like, "Oh, I have this business idea," and I'm like, "Well, are you doing it?" No. And then they start thinking of all the problems and reasons why they can't do it and all this stuff, and they don't even start, right? And they're like, "Well, how did you get started?" Well, I started folding some paper and started thinking about what an easel would look like, or I just started. I bought some paints and started painting. Now that doesn't mean you don't go and find the right mentor or things down the road, because I think mentor is a very critical part of learning your craft. Studying with an artist that exemplifies some of the things that you want is, I think, it's a much quicker way to go forward. But I do think that a lot of people have all these ideas, but they just don't. The ignition part, or just starting and failing, is just so hard for them to do, and they sit around and talk about it for years, right? And don't ever go forward in doing it. And so, if you're not one of those types of people that feels like they can just jump in and start doing it, I don't know if art is the right career for you.
Hmm.
You might need some extrinsic motivation. You might need a job. You might need a boss, a taskmaster, because art is so much about the driven human, the human that you couldn't, like, you put you or me in jail, we would, be working on a Sistine ceiling in the jail cell, or, who knows what, right?
Right.
Uh, so it's something that you have to be really honest with yourself. You can't lie to yourself as if you have intrinsic motivation or not
Hmm.
To go forward. So it's kind of a self-assessment
Yeah.
of motivation. What's motivating you, and does the motivation that you have, will that motivate you to walk over hot coals? Because an artist's life is not an easy life. You're not choosing, sipping lemonade by the poolside. You aren't. It doesn't matter how much you make, or it's like, you're not going to retire, Jeff,
Mm-mm.
right? Can you imagine yourself retiring? I mean, that's such a stupid thing for
To
an
do
artist to
what?
say, right? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But people retire in their fields because they never really fully wanted to do it in the first place, right? That's why there's the idea of retirement. But an artist doesn't retire because they have this desire to improve, to learn, to grow, to explore, to create. And so that's the question you need to ask yourself, is if you are in possession of that.
Right.
And if you aren't, um, trying to find ways to motivate yourself. And maybe one of those ways, I've shown here, is like this ignition idea, is being with a group,
Hmm.
studying with a master,
Hmm.
that motivates you, that pushes you. There's nothing better than being with a group of people that are a whole lot better than you are at something that you want to be good at. And that's what I tell my son. He's sometimes he gets down on himself because he's not the fastest runner in the group. But I'm like, you don't want to be the fastest runner in the group, or it's you're in the wrong group. you know and that's what I found, like, people like you and other colleagues that I know, you guys are all doing such amazing work that it's like, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this. There's no way I'm going to even scratch the surface of what I want to scratch, you know? There's just so much out there to learn and study and get better at. And so that's why, you know, conversations like this are important. You know, going to conferences are important. Studying with a master is important. Those can all help that ignition, help you move forward, especially if you don't have that intrinsic motivation, and maybe you can ignite at some point. But then there's some people that are just born that way, that are kind of driven, and I guess to some degree as a kid I was pretty driven. I have a feeling you were too. You kind of came out of the gate. You know?
No, actually, I wasn't as a kid. My mother worried about me. Yeah, something about testosterone
Really?
made me kick in. Yeah.
Because, you know, we can talk at the end of the day, like whether, you know, how to do your curls or how to lift weights and stuff like that. But, you know, if we can't get that person to the gym, or it's even in remotely hard for them, what are you going to do to help them? You can't help them at all if they're not willing to, or just so like knocking on the door at 8 a.m. say, okay, are we ready to go? We're ready to go. You know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when you're an artist, you don't have those people to run with anymore. You got to get up out of bed every morning and go to work by yourself and figure out how to motivate yourself. So I think it's interesting. I've done so many of these interviews now, and every time I get a different piece of advice, which is really, really great and enlightening and inspiring. And this is very unique advice. And what I take from it are two things. One of the things I like that you said is don't worry about your talent. Don't worry about how good you are. And that's a thing that's crippling. But then also this idea of assess your motivation. Yeah, those are great pieces of advice. I appreciate that. Bryan, it's been an awesome conversation. And thanks for taking the time. I know how incredibly busy you are. So I really appreciate it.
You know, yeah, I really enjoyed it. So appreciate the talk. And this is kind of unique in terms of the talks we've had, or at least that I've had in the past with other podcasters, where it's been a little bit more about painting and stuff like that, which is fine and good. But I'd like to get beyond or underneath all of that.
Yeah.
And find out, you know, just talk about a little bit more of the mechanics of a human psyche and what that does to motivate someone to create.
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.